sat at the dinner table, the mashed potatoes turning cold on my plate, and watched my father's face as he asked the question that would unravel everything. "How do you like your new apartment, sweetheart?" His voice was warm, genuinely curious, the way it always was when he was trying to connect. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. My mother froze mid-sip of her wine. My brother Brandon looked up from his plate with that expression, the one that said he already knew something was wrong. Because here's the thing, I had never told my father about any new apartment. I had never mentioned moving. For the past 8 months, I had been living in a studio on the other side of the city, working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, keeping it a complete secret from the man sitting across from me now. The man who had just come home from his business trip to Singapore. The man who apparently knew things about my life that I had carefully hidden from him. My father had been gone for 6 weeks. 6 weeks that felt like 6 months, though not for the reasons most daughters miss their fathers. Dad's absence meant breathing room. It meant I could move through my life without the constant weight of his expectations, his questions, his need to be involved in every decision I made. He was a good man, everyone said so, successful, thoughtful, present. That was exactly the problem. I'm Ashley, by the way, 32 years old. I work in marketing for a mid-size pharmaceutical company, make decent money, pay my taxes, vote, volunteer at the community center twice a month. On paper, I'm exactly the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of. But on paper, I'm also someone who still asked her father's permission before signing apartment leases, before accepting job promotions, before basically anything that felt remotely important. My mother, Karen, used to joke about it when I was younger. "She's got his eyes and his need to plan everything 3 years in advance," she'd say, laughing. It stopped being funny around the time I turned 28. The apartment I moved into 8 months ago was a decision I made alone. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone at work. I certainly didn't tell my ex-boyfriend Michael, who had moved back in with his parents after our breakup, and immediately started texting me about how we could make it work if I just understood his perspective. I needed a place where no one could find me, a place where I could be myself without explanation or apology, or someone else's opinion about whether I was making the right choice. The new apartment was nothing fancy, a 1-bedroom in the Riverside district, $1,200 a month, with a kitchen the size of a closet, and a radiator that clanked like it was alive. But it was mine. Every month when I paid the rent, every time I decorated a wall or changed the locks or left dirty dishes in the sink without anyone commenting on it, I felt something click into place inside my chest. This was what independence felt like. This was what I had been missing. My mother had noticed I seemed different when I'd visit for Sunday dinners. Lighter, maybe. More myself. "You're glowing," she said 3 months ago, touching my cheek with the back of her hand. "Is it a man?" I had laughed and said it was just new skincare, but the truth was simpler and more complicated at the same time. It was freedom. It was making decisions at 2 in the morning and not having to justify them to anyone. It was playing music loud and sleeping until noon on weekends and inviting people over without worrying about what my father would think about their careers or their family backgrounds or their life choices. But my father was back now, and he knew about the apartment, which meant someone had told him, which meant my 8 months of quiet independence were about to become very, very complicated. "I think you misheard," I said carefully, setting my fork down. "I didn't move." My father smiled, but it was the kind of smile that meant he wasn't going to let this go. "Jennifer called me last week," he said, referring to my best friend since college. "She was excited that you finally had your own place. She said you've been talking about it for years. I'm just surprised you didn't mention it to us." There it was, the weight settling back down on my shoulders. Not malice in what he said. He genuinely seemed pleased in his own way, but also the implicit accusation. How could you keep this from me? How could you make such a big decision without consulting me? What else are you hiding? "I was going to tell you," I said, which was a lie. "I just wanted to make sure everything was settled first." "Of course," my father said, reaching for the salad bowl. "That makes sense. You always were thoughtful about these things. So when can I come see it? I'd like to help you with the decorating. Maybe we can look at your lease, make sure everything is in order legally. You never know what landlords might try to slip past you if you're not careful." My brother Brandon made a small noise, something between a cough and a laugh. My mother's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I could feel the evening crystallizing into something different, something with weight and consequence. "Sure," I heard myself say, "maybe next weekend." But even as I said it, I knew that next weekend would be the beginning of the end of something I had only just begun to build. The following Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt almost insulting, crisp, sunny, the kind of day that made everything seem possible. My father pulled up to the Riverside district at precisely 2 o'clock. I knew it would be 2 o'clock because my father was never late. He was the kind of man who arrived 10 minutes early to everything, treating punctuality like a moral virtue. I watched from my apartment window as he stepped out of his Mercedes, taking in the neighborhood, with the careful assessment of someone evaluating a property investment. The building wasn't impressive. It was a converted warehouse with exposed brick, large windows, and a certain charm that came from authentic wear rather than intentional design. It was exactly the kind of place my father would have opinions about. I opened the door before he could knock. "Dad, welcome." He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, I let myself relax into it. He smelled like the cologne he'd worn for 30 years, something woodsy and expensive that had become synonymous with safety and authority. When he stepped back, his eyes were already scanning the apartment, cataloging, assessing. "Well," he said, moving into the living room, "it's cozy." Cozy. The word landed like a small criticism. In my father's vocabulary, cozy meant small. Small meant not quite good enough. The apartment suddenly looked different through his eyes. The thrift store furniture, the mismatched curtains I'd picked out at Target, the bare walls I'd been meaning to decorate but hadn't because I liked the simplicity. "I like it," I said firmly. "It's mine." My father walked to the window, looking out at the street below. "How much are you paying?" $1,200 a month. He turned back to me, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "That's more than 30% of your gross income if you're making what I think you're making. That violates the standard housing ratio. Have you looked at other options? There are much better neighborhoods, safer neighborhoods, where you could get more space for less money. I have a colleague who knows a realtor. I could make a call." There it was, the thing that had driven me to move in the first place, the constant belief that I couldn't make good decisions on my own, that I needed guidance, needed correction, needed him to optimize my life according to his spreadsheet of best practices. "I'm happy here," I said. "I made this choice." "Of course you did," my father said, not unkindly. "But decision-making isn't just about what makes you happy in the moment. It's about long-term financial health. Your credit score, your debt-to-income ratio, your 5-year plan, these things matter, Ashley. They matter more than you might think right now." I felt something shift inside my chest, a tightening, a recognition that this was never going to be a visit about him seeing my home. This was going to be about him seeing my failure to make the decision he would have made. "I'd like to see the lease," he continued, moving toward my small kitchen table where I'd left the paperwork. "I want to make sure there are no clauses that could hurt you later." "Dad, I read the lease. I understood it. I signed it." "I'm sure you did," he said, already picking up the document. "But I have years of experience with contracts. Legal language is designed to obscure. Let me just take a look." He sat down at my table, pulling out his reading glasses from his jacket pocket, and I watched my independence shrink into the corner of the room like a frightened animal. This was exactly why I hadn't told him. This moment right here, the moment when something I had done became something he needed to fix. "These utilities are included?" he asked, pointing at a line. "Yes." "That's unusual. Are you sure they're not just capped? Because if there's a cap and you exceed it—" "Dad, stop." He looked up at me over his glasses, genuinely confused. "Stop what?" "Stop treating my life like a problem you need to solve. I moved here. I'm paying my rent. I'm not asking for your help." My father set the lease down carefully and removed his glasses. When he looked at me again, his expression had shifted into something more wounded. I'm trying to help you, Ashley. That's what fathers do. We try to protect our children from making expensive mistakes. By not trusting them to make any decisions at all? The words came out sharper than I intended. By questioning every choice they make? That's not protection, Dad. That's control. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. My father stood up slowly, and I could see the hurt moving across his face like a cloud. I don't think that's fair, he said quietly. I've always supported you. I've always been there. You've always been there to correct me, I said, to tell me what I should have done differently, to make sure I know I could have done better. And maybe I could have. Maybe this apartment isn't perfect. Maybe my job isn't prestigious enough, or my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, wasn't ambitious enough, or my career trajectory isn't steep enough. But it's my life, Dad, not yours, mine. My father was quiet for a long moment. I could see him processing, trying to figure out how to handle this like he would handle any problem, with logic, with solutions, with the assumption that if he just explained things correctly, I would see that he was right. Jennifer told me you seemed unhappy, he said finally. That's why she mentioned the apartment. She was worried about you. I thought maybe moving away from Michael, getting your own place, that might be good for you. I wanted to understand what was happening in your life. By investigating me, I said, by calling my friends and asking them about my personal decisions? I didn't investigate you. Jennifer volunteered the information. She cares about you just like I do. Then stop trying to fix me, I said. I'm not broken. I'm just different from you. I make decisions differently. I don't need a 5-year plan and a risk assessment. I just need to live my life and figure things out as I go. My father put his glasses back in his pocket and looked around the apartment one more time. Well, he said, I can see that you're determined to do things your own way. And I respect that, I do. But I'm still your father. That means I'm still going to worry about you. I'm still going to hope that you'll make good choices. And if you ever want my advice, it's there, whether you ask for it or not. He said it with the kind of certainty that suggested he just delivered something profound, something true. But all I heard was another version of the same message he'd been delivering my whole life. I know better. Trust me to know better. I think you should go, I said. He flinched slightly. Ashley, I'm serious, Dad. I need you to leave. I need you to respect the boundary I'm setting. I'm asking you to leave my apartment. My father looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him running through his mental database of how to respond to this. Negotiation tactics, persuasion strategies, ways to turn this around. Finally, he seemed to accept that none of them would work. All right, he said, moving toward the door. I'll go, but I hope you'll think about what I said. And I hope you'll call your mother. She's been worried. I didn't respond. I just opened the door and watched him walk out. He paused on the threshold, as if expecting me to call him back, to soften, to apologize for being unreasonable. But I didn't. I stood there as he walked down the hallway, as he descended the stairs, as he got back into his perfect Mercedes and drove away from my small apartment in the Riverside district. For the first time since I'd moved in, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was angry. Angry at him for being unable to see me as a full adult, capable of making her own decisions. Angry at myself for letting him into my space at all, for thinking maybe this time would be different. Angry at the whole dynamic that had shaped me into someone who needed to move across the city to feel like she could breathe. That night, I called Jennifer. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the guilty pause before she spoke. He asked me about the apartment, she said before I could accuse her. I didn't think it was a secret. I thought it was something you were proud of. It was, I said. But it was also something I didn't want him to know about. There's a difference. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's done, I said. Just don't tell him anything else about my life. Nothing. If he asks, you don't know. You don't remember. You don't have an opinion. Ashley, come on. He's your father. He's just trying to understand what's going on with you. He can understand by asking me directly and respecting the answers I give him, even if he disagrees with them. That's how adults communicate, not through intermediaries, not through investigation and information gathering. Jennifer was quiet. I could hear her thinking about it, trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she said, "You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." After we hung up, I sat on my couch in my small apartment and did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I made a decision without worrying about what anyone else would think. I decided that I was going to take control of my own narrative, that I was going to stop letting my father's expectations dictate how I lived, that I was going to build a life so clearly, so undeniably mine, that there would be no room for doubt or correction or someone else's better idea. The next week, I changed my phone number. Not because my father was calling me, he wasn't, but because I needed the symbolic gesture, a clean break from the infrastructure of my old life. I updated my emergency contact information at work. I set up a P.O. box for my mail so that no one could show up at my apartment unannounced. I blocked my mother's contact information temporarily, not permanently, but long enough to establish that I needed space. I also did something else. I called a therapist. A woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, who specialized in family dynamics and adult independence. I sat in her office in the building next to the pharmacy where I'd picked up antacids the morning my father visited, and I told her everything. About the apartment, about the secrecy, about the way my father's voice still had the power to make me feel like a failure no matter what I accomplished. "It sounds like you're establishing healthy boundaries," Dr. Morrison said. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and the kind of presence that made you feel heard without judgment. "The question is whether you're doing it from a place of growth or a place of punishment." "What's the difference?" I asked. "Growth means you're setting boundaries to protect your own well-being and autonomy. Punishment means you're setting boundaries to hurt someone who hurt you. One is sustainable, the other is reactive." I thought about that, about my father driving away from my apartment, about the look on his face when I told him to leave, about the satisfaction I'd felt in that moment of power. "I think it might be both," I admitted. "That's honest," Dr. Morrison said. "Most of the time, our motivations are mixed. The question is whether you're willing to examine them, whether you're willing to move toward him eventually, or whether you just want to make sure he understands how much he hurt you." I didn't have an answer to that. Not then. 4 months later, in early spring, I got a letter in my P.O. box. It was from my father. His handwriting on the envelope, formal and precise, like everything else about him. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me read it. The letter was short, not apologetic exactly, but different from anything he'd ever said to me before. "Dear Ashley, I've been thinking about our conversation in your apartment. Your mother asked me to read some books about parenting adult children. I didn't want to read them. I thought they were unnecessary. I thought that if you just understood the logic behind my suggestions, you would see that I was right. But I've been reading them anyway, and I've come to understand that being right isn't the same as being helpful, that protection isn't the same as control. I can see now how my need to optimize your life might have felt like a refusal to trust you. I'm sorry for that. I would like to see you again, not to discuss your apartment or your lease or your life choices, just to see you. But I understand if you're not ready for that. I can wait. With love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times, and then I read it again. I sat with it for a week before I responded, and when I did, it wasn't a long letter, but it was honest. "Dad, I'm not ready yet, but I will be. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trying. Love, Ashley." 6 months after that, we had coffee, not at my apartment, at a neutral location, a small cafe in Riverside, close enough to my place that I could control the environment, but not so close that he felt like he was invading my space. He ordered black coffee. I ordered a latte. We talked about his work, about my job, about the news. We didn't talk about my apartment or my choices or the future. But at the end, he said something that surprised me. "I'm proud of you," he said, "not because of what you've accomplished or how you're living your life, but because you were brave enough to tell me no, to set a boundary. Most people can't do that with their parents. Most people just accept the way things are." I felt something loosen in my chest. "I'm proud of you too," I said, "for listening." He smiled, and it was different from his usual smiles, softer, more genuine. "We're both learning," he said. "The apartment on Riverside is still mine. I've decorated the walls now. I've bought real furniture. I've built a life here that feels solid and real and entirely my own. My father has been here twice since that first terrible visit. Both times he asked how I was doing and actually listened to the answers. Both times he left without offering unsolicited advice or trying to improve my life. It's not perfect. We still have moments of tension. He still sometimes begins sentences with, "Have you thought about?" before catching himself and stopping. I still sometimes feel the old defensive instinct rising when he asks questions, but we're trying. And that, it turns out, is enough. What I learned through all of this, the secrecy, the confrontation, the painful months of silence, is that independence isn't something you can steal from someone. You have to be given the space to claim it. And sometimes, the people who love you most are the ones who struggle the most with letting you have that space. Not because they're bad people, but because love and control can look so similar when you're on the inside of them. I'm still learning how to be my own woman, even at 32. But now at least, I'm doing it with my father's permission. More importantly, I'm doing it with my own.